The first episode begins with Dr. Henry Morgan, the protagonist, narrating his life story as he enters a subway station. While on the train, he notices a beautiful blonde woman and, recognizing her Russian chocolate brand, greets her in Russian, which surprises her. She invites him to her cello performance and for drinks afterward. But before they can make plans, the train crashes into a stationary train, killing everyone on board. Continuing his narration, Henry reveals his unique condition. He is immortal. This strange journey began 2 centuries ago when he was a ship's doctor. After diagnosing a sick slave with fever, Henry was horrified when the ship's captain ordered the slave thrown overboard. Henry tried to intervene, but the captain shot him and had his body tossed into the sea. Ever since, whenever Henry dies, he reawakens in a large body of water, completely naked. After the train crash, he reappears in the East River, only to be promptly arrested for public nudity by 2 police officers. The next morning, his confidant and only friend Abraham picks him up from the station. Abraham is the sole person who knows about Henry's immortality. Meanwhile, Detective Joe Martinez, after sneaking out of a one-night stand, heads to the subway crash site, where she finds evidence suggesting the train conductor suffered a heart attack. She also finds Henry's pocket watch and brings it to the city medical examiner's office, where she meets Henry. In an unexpected turn, Henry offers Joe his condolences on her husband's recent death, which he deduced from the faded mark on her ring finger. Although surprised by his insight, Joe remains composed. Henry later reveals that the conductor's death was due to poisoning, turning the case from an accident into a murder investigation. Just then, Henry receives an anonymous call from a mysterious man who knows of Henry's survival and hints at knowing Henry's true nature. Alarmed, Henry races home, instructing Abe to pack up as he feels the need to flee. Haunted by memories of past lifetimes when the government discovered his secret and subjected him to torturous experiments. Abe urges Henry to stop running and face his fears, as he's been doing so all his life. Henry relents, and in the background, we see a portrait of Abigail, Henry's former wife, whom he met in a field hospital in Germany during World War II. Later, Henry receives a sealed envelope from his colleague Lucas at the morgue. Inside, he finds an old photo of himself with Abigail from 1955, bringing back memories of her belief that his immortality served a greater purpose. The envelope also contains his subway ticket and a note, leading Henry to suspect that the anonymous caller may have caused the crash to test his immortality. To investigate, Henry asks Abe to inject him with the conductor's blood to analyze the poison. After dying and being retrieved by Abe from the river once again, Henry identifies the poison as aconite, a rare lethal toxin. Meanwhile, Detective Joe Martinez notices Henry's pocket watch and surveillance footage from the crash site. She questions him, and he explains that he left the train before departure, adding that the conductor died of aconite poisoning. Joe, realizing he wouldn't disclose this detail if guilty, decides to let him go. Back at the morgue, Henry and Lucas find an injection site behind the conductor's ear, along with a fingerprint. Henry sends it to Joe, which leads them to Hans, a chemist whose wife had tragically died in an accident involving the same conductor. Joe and Henry investigate Hans's home, where Henry finds a dead rat in a greenhouse full of aconite plants. Hans unexpectedly returns, but before they can apprehend him, he escapes after throwing an aconite beaker at Joe. Henry and Joe discover that Hans plans to release aconite at Grand Central Station in revenge against the train company he blames for his wife's death. They rush to the station, where Hans shoots Joe during a confrontation. Henry attempts to stop Hans, but is also shot. In a final struggle, he tackles Hans and they both fall, dying on impact. At the hospital, Joe is bewildered to see Henry alive, recalling she saw him fall with Hans. Henry dismisses it, blaming her confusion on morphine. Just then, he receives another call from the anonymous man, who reveals he is also immortal and witnessed Henry's fall. In a flashback, Henry remembers a young Abigail saving an infant, who would grow up to be Abe, whom Henry raised as his son. Later, Joe visits Henry at his antique shop, inviting him to assist in a new homicide case and returning his watch. In the second episode, a distressed woman named Vicky asks her cab driver to stop on a bridge, where she falls to her death. Joe and her partner Mike consult Henry, who quickly determines that, contrary to the initial suicide report, Vicky was murdered. That night, Henry visits the bridge and finds 2 fingerprints at the spot where Vicky fell. Henry is investigating a mysterious murder when, unknowingly, he is struck by a truck and dies, only to vanish before the truck driver can find his body. The next day, Lucas tells Henry he found skin tissue under the victim, Vicky's nails. To Henry's horror, he also receives a mocking gift from his anonymous stalker, referencing the truck accident. Abe traces the gift paper back to a now-closed Italian hotel, where Henry and Abigail once fell in love in 1945, recalling a time when he left her a farewell note, only for Abigail to chase after him and convince him to stay. Henry and Joe later visit Vicky's university campus to question her colleagues. They meet Paul, who mentions she was translating an ancient Latin codex, and Professor James, who awkwardly offers an alibi, claiming he was at the opera with his wife. Joe suspects this, noting he volunteered information without being asked. Henry secretly takes James's pen, confirming it matches the DNA under Vicky's nails. When questioned, James admits he was having an affair with Vicky, but denies killing her. However, soon afterward, Joe informs Henry that James has committed suicide. At the crime scene, Henry deduces that James was actually killed by a left-handed person. Further investigation leads them to Paul, who felt betrayed over academic credit. In a panic, Paul tries to escape, but Joe and Mike apprehend him, saving Henry. That night, Henry receives another anonymous call. His stalker, who claims to be immortal for 2,000 years, introduces himself as Adam. In the following episode, Henry shares his research with Abe, hinting that certain methods may keep him dead longer. Meanwhile, a teenager steals a briefcase from an elderly man named Bill, who chases him but suddenly collapses, vomiting blood. At the morgue, Henry and Lucas discover that while Bill's body appears around 30 years old, his brain is over 100 and severely damaged. Joe finds $7,000 in a business card in Bill's briefcase. At the crime scene, Henry spots a suspicious woman leading them to a youth clinic where Dr. Frederick introduces his youth shake. Henry takes a sample and recalls a flashback from 1906 of a doctor friend desperately trying to cure his tuberculosis. Joe discovers that Dr. Frederick is a scammer named Harold. They track him to a party where they soon find him dead. In the lab, Henry identifies proteins from deceased individuals in the so-called youth potions. Additionally, he notices a disturbing trend. 12 bodies have mysteriously gone missing across the city. The investigation points them to an EMT named Anton, who claims to have killed his partner, Harold. However, Henry quickly realizes Anton's story doesn't add up and confirms he isn't responsible for the deaths of the young victims. During the investigation, Henry spots Abe's name on a list of users, but Abe reassures him he only visited once. With Abe's assistance, they manage to intercept Sasha, a female chemist, just before she attempts to jump in front of a train, distraught over the harm her drug has caused. Later, Henry takes Abe skating. In the following episode, a prominent New Yorker, Gloria Carlisle, attends an event honoring her at the age of 91. During her son Conrad's speech, someone follows Gloria into a dim hallway, and moments later, she is discovered dead. Henry sends Lucas to investigate, as Gloria had once encouraged him to propose to Abigail. Unintentionally, Lucas mentions to a reporter that Gloria was murdered, and the news spreads rapidly. The mayor is furious, as the information was meant to stay confidential. Lucas writes up his resignation, but Henry takes responsibility in Lieutenant Joanna's office, and Conrad Carlisle removes him from his mother's case. Still, Joe believes in Henry and brings him to the crime scene, where he deduces that Gloria was pushed down the stairs and crawled to the location where she was found. CCTV footage reveals Lance, Gloria's granddaughter's boyfriend, followed her into the hallway. Questioned, Lance claims he only wanted Gloria's blessing for his marriage proposal, mentioning that Gloria spoke of a burning smell, which Henry suspects might be from a drug reaction. He speculates Gloria was poisoned, but when he returns to his lab, Lucas informs him that Gloria's body has been moved to the morgue. Henry sends Abe to Gloria's mansion, disguised as an antique dealer to photograph her medications, but finds no clues. Later, Henry notices Conrad's hands shaking, linking it to the drug used on Gloria. Under interrogation, Conrad admits he had been trying to reinstate himself in his mother's will, suggesting he had no motive to kill her, especially since she left her estate to her nurse. Lucas reviews the autopsy report, supporting Henry's theory. Visiting Gloria's estate, Joe and Henry find epilepsy medication in her car. Back at the scene, Henry deduces that Gloria had planned her own death, wanting to die near a painting of her first love. Her timing was disrupted by Lance's visit, preventing her from reaching her desired spot. The next episode opens with Raul, an ex-convict turned boxer who mentors kids at a community center. 3 days later, Raul is found dead in his apartment with a heroin needle in his arm. Examining the scene, Henry suspects foul play, later confirming during autopsy that the needle didn't reach his bloodstream, meaning he was already dead when staged as a drug overdose. That evening, Henry and Lucas retrieve a rat that fed on Raul's body and find a ring in its stomach. Fabian, a trainer at the center, tells police that a wealthy developer named Tommy wanted to buy the property. After corroborating with Sergio, a nearby shop owner, Joe and Henry visit a construction site owned by Tommy, finding the same substance on Raul's shoes. They locate Raul's phone, buried at the site, revealing Tommy was his last contact. They question Tommy, but lacking solid evidence, release him. Later, Joe and Henry observe Lou delivering an envelope from Tommy to the center. Breaking into Fabian's locker, they find $5,000, and Fabian admits it was bribe money to convince locals to sell, but denies any involvement in Raul's death. To aid the investigation, Fabian wears a wire to meet with Tommy, but only obtains a confession of bribery. Finally, Henry realizes that one of the center kids, Alejandro, might know the killer. However, Alejandro panics and runs when he spots someone familiar outside a nearby shop. Henry and Joe search for Alejandro, but only find his abandoned bike. Recalling seeing Sergio earlier, they rush to his shop and discover Sergio trying to harm Alejandro in the basement. Sergio manages to escape, but is struck by an oncoming truck, dying instantly. With Sergio dead, the police can only charge Tommy with bribery, while Fabian finally reveals the full truth to the community. Later, Joe joins Henry and Abe for dinner, curious about how the two met. In the 6th episode, a package arrives at the precinct containing a human heart, which turns out to belong to Mary Kelly, a missing prostitute last seen in a dark alley near her hotel. Henry and Joe trace her steps to a butcher shop, where they uncover her remains. Henry, reminded of an old murder case, explains that the killer mimicked Jack the Ripper's methods exactly. Just then, Henry receives a call from Adam, who taunts him, mentioning that he's also in London in hopes they can finally catch Jack the Ripper together. Henry rushes to find Adam, but only finds a burner phone left on a car, making him suspect Adam may be the killer. That evening, Henry pores over his old notes and identifies that the killer used a rare surgical knife, likely obtained from an antique shop. While Abe follows this lead, Henry examines Mary's body and notices a star on her arm, different from the crescent on the original victim's arm, confirming that the killer isn't actually Jack the Ripper, but someone using old newspaper details to imitate him. At the library, they locate the person who checked out the relevant papers. He runs when Henry and Joe approach, but is later caught. During questioning, he claims he's the author of Soul Slasher and had studied the Ripper cases for his book. Seeing Joe and Henry made him flee, as he has many unhinged fans. After Adam's taunting call, Henry realizes the killer is leaving clues inspired by infamous murder cases. When a woman is found murdered in the style of the Black Dahlia, Henry predicts the next case will mimic the Boston Strangler. Meanwhile, Abe secures a handbook detailing the rare knife used in Mary's murder. The police arrest Devin Bentley, a writer who seems more thrilled about the fame than concerned about the accusations. Later, Henry discovers that Devin's father, Mark, actually bought the knife. Before Henry can alert Joe, Mark attacks him. Joe arrives just in time to save Henry, but in a shocking twist, Adam appears and fatally slits Henry's throat, triggering his resurrection. In the 7th episode, the murder of Dr. Tyler Forrester, a well-known humanitarian, reveals secrets tied to his high school friends and a past tragedy. Joe and Henry meet Tyler's friends, including Carter, who presented Tyler an award before his death. Henry catches Carter lying and learns Tyler had a falling out with his family after a trip following high school graduation. Investigating further, Henry and Joe uncover that during this trip, Tyler's friends were involved in the accidental death of a 17-year-old named Robert, which they kept secret for years. Tyler, however, had planned to confess, which likely led to his murder. The team finds security footage showing Carter and Paul disposing of evidence. leading them to Robert's remains. The truth unravels. Cassandra accidentally killed Robert while driving drunk, and her friends helped cover it up. They all deny killing Tyler, but Henry deduces that a gas station worker named Morris was blackmailing him. When Morris tries to flee, he shoots Henry, who is saved by Joe. With Morris apprehended, the season ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Watch more videos on our channel and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.